Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for waiting for us. We're really excited to talk today, looking at the future of business, how we can embrace neurodiverse talent for innovation and growth. We've got an amazing panel here lined up for you today. So I'm just going to quickly introduce, we've got Jack McFerran, Joanna Gibbs, Charlie Beswick, and Dan Harris. So I'd just like to ask each of them just to quickly give us a summary of their professional, but also their personal interest in this topic. I'd like to start with you, Jack.
Hi, my name is Jack McFerran. I look after European equities for Goldman Sachs, and I came into this really through my own neurodiversity, but really as a parent. And we'll come into it more, but we started a parent group in the office, and that has expanded and expanded and expanded, and hopefully acted as a big support for employees in their day jobs, but also mainly as parents and the workplace.
Thank you. And Joanna.
Thank you. My name is Joanna Gibbs. I'm the founder and director of a company called Sensational Tutors. I'm a specialist teacher. I'm also diagnosed ADHD. Part of my vision and my mission is to make sure that children with additional needs and those with SEND and neurodivergent children have the right support in place, but I'm also equally passionate in making sure that that support is also provided in the workplace.
Charlie.
My name is Charlie Beswick. I am the mum of twin boys. One is autistic, epileptic, and has significant learning needs. And I've been a teacher for 20 years as well, so I'm bringing that experience, and I currently support organisations to better support parent carers in the workplace as well. So bringing a little bit of every aspect to the talk today.
And Dan.
My name's Dan Harris. I'm the founder of the charity Neurodiversity in Business. We're a global charity trying to transform the corporate world, making sure that we can hire and retain neurodivergent talent. More importantly than that, I'm the dad of an 11-year-old non-speaking autistic boy. We call him the Joshy Man, and he's a great advocate for the power that technology has had in transforming his life.
Amazing, thank you so much. And Dan, I'd like to just start with you, if that's all right, find out a bit more about your journey. Because one of my friends recently said to me, he was told by someone in 2025, you can't be autistic, you have a job. So I was just wondering if you can just, I'm sure you've got much more ridiculous anecdotes than that, but I wonder if you could just, for the uninitiated, just give us a brief overview of, how neurodiverse individuals can actually, provide a competitive advantage in today's business landscape.
Well, yeah, we in Neurodiversity in Business are not looking to make capitalism more efficient. We're not looking for our corporate members to have a greater profit margin. What we're trying to do is show that actually, we recognise that the value of the human existence is not one of that economic output. There is a moral imperative for people, big companies, to be doing the right thing. But pleasingly, that economic argument is already settled. We increasingly see the corporate members that we have, and I know you'll kind of share some experience in a minute, but we see that they are bought into the idea that adapting the workplace to suit the retention and attraction for neurodivergent talent, actually that benefits the whole organisation. It enables you to be tapping into the vast talent pools that are out there. And also, when we recognise that we are the 1 in 5, we are 20% of the workforce already, it's super important to focus on the cost of losing and not retaining good quality talent, because we all know the significant costs for businesses of training and recruitment and attraction. So I think that economic case has been made.
Yeah, it's great that you start with the moral and the economic comes. That sounds brilliant. So Jack, you just mentioned briefly about one of the initiatives you pioneered at Goldman Sachs that seems quite simple as an idea, but it's been wildly successful. So I'd just like if you tell us a bit more about that and how, to give an idea of what organizations can do to foster an inclusive environment.
This was it started in a very simple form of just trying to support other parents, and so I actually put together a group of 10 other parents I knew going through a similar difficult situation, and then as the year went on, we thought we'd open it up, and we decided to put on a parents' evening. That was nice because it sort of moved it one step away from the employee talking about their vulnerability, but it was vulnerability to the parent rather than themselves maybe. And then we got 3 speakers, one on the home, one on alternative educational paths, and one on careers. We sent the invite out and we're kind of overwhelmed. 600 people came to the London event. They then asked us to do this in New York, and 900 people came to that. And I think, back to some of these points that Dan was really making, we could get into the economic case about retention, which is one of our biggest costs, and therefore, being able to improve retention, improve the environment helps. But actually, a lot of this was just about things like language, right? Learning the language around neurodiversity. What does the neurodiverse umbrella mean? And helping employees grapple with that. And Goldman are not holding themselves up as experts at all. We're nascent, and we're trying to use the organization in these evenings to bring people together to discuss what other organizations are doing, what works at your organization, what works at your organization, to see how we can all learn together as parents and employers.
Can I just add something there as well? I think it's really important, regardless of the setting, whether it's a workplace or whether it's education, that people feel seen, that people feel recognized and valued. And I think those relationships are key. So I think Jack and I were talking earlier about the power of, an organization like Goldman saying, well, listen, we're not pretending to be perfect. We don't have all the answers, but we are willing to try. And if you can meet us halfway, then that's where the magic happens. But I think that certainly from an educator's perspective, when the children that I've been working with feel seen and feel special and don't feel marginalized, that's when we get progress, whatever that looks like for that child.
Yeah, I think there's also something to say in terms of stigma and trying to reduce some of that stigma. I think those conversations that we're having as adults can be incredibly powerful if the communication is right. And I think that, as the discussion has been had just now, as we're talking about, communication is absolutely everything. And just emphasizing that we are creating safe spaces that, in terms of safeguarding the young people as well, we are creating these environments so that children can share and adults can share with us with less stigma.
I think there are small things you can do as an organization, there are bigger things you can do as an organization, and harder wins, right? And it can be as simple as a small parent group, which is quite easy to form. It could be having a teams, parent teams internal chat page, which we've created, where now, there's over 100 people on that, one here in London, where people can post about sensational tutors, or they can post about stuff that can help other parents. So, a lot of the stuff I've been certainly trying to do in an organization are not the gigantic leaps, but actually quite simple day-to-day practical things, which again, as you talk about feeling heard, makes parents feel that the organization is trying to move in the right direction. Changing our BUPA policy is one of our goals, but it's a much bigger, harder game to get mental health on BUPA plans.
Yeah, small steps. Yeah, I think that's definitely a key point we want to get across, that is, organizations don't need to do massive top-to-bottom restructures, right? It's just small steps, visibility, getting the problem known out there in the wider world. Yeah, thanks for that. So, Joanna, I just wanted to jump in again on Charlie, on your experience within education. So we're talking about small steps once students move into business, but talking about the foundations when they're at school. What are some of the barriers, do you think, in education? Are we setting students up, not just neurodiverse students, but students in general, to access the business world from your perspective?
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for the national curriculum, I have to say, and I know everybody talks about this, but it fundamentally is something we need to consider. I do think, and I do believe that there should be somebody considering changing the national curriculum, but also thinking about the soft skills that are also can be called power skills now. But alongside a social curriculum and a social and emotional curriculum, developing those skills alongside it would be really important. But Dan, as you mentioned, any strategies that are going to be able to support neurodiverse people in the workplace are also going to be supporting the same children in the classroom too.
Yeah, and I think we all see that there's that big disconnect between education and the employment world. So as much as we're focused only on 18s, we recognise a substantial part of our community are disenfranchised before they even get to 18.
Yeah.
And I think a part of that is because children now are reduced to a number. So the assessment reduces them to a progress point, a gap to fill. And children are not just a number. There's so much. I was sharing the story earlier about my own son. My other twin son is undiagnosed autistic. It took him 7 attempts to pass his driving test. And that was because he was so anxious that he couldn't pass the test. He's an excellent driver. His instructor said, I can't teach you anymore. You're a great driver. but actually he just couldn't focus in that pressurized moment of the test. And certainly as an educator, I was seeing that a lot in my classrooms, is that children were articulate, their retention was excellent, they had a real grasp, a real positive grasp on topics and could apply that widely. But if you asked them to sit down and write about it, then they were hitting barriers. And I feel like we're not doing enough to remove those barriers for children in the right now to set them up. We are setting them up to fail in many ways, and the national curriculum needs a serious overhaul if we're going to allow every child to thrive.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, that the driving test disabled him there. He was a great driver, but having to jump through those hoops, you couldn't show that. I guess it's quite similar in the business world that, neurodiverse individuals can do lots of these things, but not within the narrow, rigid structure.
Yeah, an interview processes.
Yeah.
If an interview process is very traditional and typical, then that's a barrier instantly for talent that might otherwise really help an organisation to thrive. So, yeah.
I think the thing that I'd like to come back to is there's a specific reason why over millennia these genes have persisted in the human genotype. So there's a reason that neurodivergent talent is there, is actually we have incredibly strong problem-solving skills, creativity, innovation. So I think our society, and I think business is leading the way here, is showing that actually there are some unique strengths which we as a society, but also as a business community, need to be tapping into.
That's a really interesting perspective there. I remember one of my students, giving a presentation once about how ADHD is the evolutionary advantage, which changed my perspective many, many years ago. Thank you so much for that. And Charlie, I just wanted to jump in on your other hat. You work in business, also an educator, but you're in the often overlooked area of, parents or carers of neurodivergent individuals. And I just wanted to get your perspective on, how the rigid corporate structure could, accommodate individuals in your situation, parents and carers of neurodivergent individuals, and how, what organizations can do, but also how they can benefit from that.
Yeah, I think there's an incredible wealth of talents and skills that are transferable from looking after a child who requires more attention, more problem solving into the business world. Parent carers bring excellent skills, so multitasking, as you've just mentioned, a lot of those transferable skills, multitasking, being able to pivot, being able to think on the spot and out of the box, sort of great multidisciplinary, dealing with different agencies. So there's a real wealth of experience that parent carers can bring to a workplace, but employers often will see them as a burden or an inconvenience. Maybe somebody that needs to have time off or wants to have time off. And I will say nobody wants to be a carer. It's nobody's choice. If I need time off because my son's had an epileptic seizure, I would much rather be at work with a healthy child, thank you very much. So for me, it's really important that I am helping employers to see, yes, the challenges that carers bring to the workplace and have an experience accessing that, but also just how rich and the dynamic that they can bring to an organisation, and reducing the barriers. So things like flexible working, but where that's not appropriate, flexible thinking is really vital. So as I was a teacher, and one of the rules was that teachers were not allowed their mobile phone in the classroom. I was, as a reasonable adjustment. And that didn't distract me. I wasn't on Facebook and Instagram when I should have been teaching, as much as they were terrified I would be. But what that meant was if my child was in danger or needed me, I knew straight away. So it actually reduced my anxiety and made me a better teacher because of that adjustment. So it really is about empowering employers to know that they can do simple, very small things. As Jack mentioned, small things can make a massive difference to really get the best out of the talent that they've got in their workplace.
I think that's true, though. By having these forums, even if you start as a parent forum, it allows you to then have a conversation with your manager that you're attending a parent forum, which again then becomes a more casual education with your manager about the language of neurodiversity and what that means to be a parent, and therefore that you might need a bit of work accommodation. And so a lot of what we've been doing really is just creating this space that you can talk about neurodiversity in an open way, so that maybe you can have some accommodation as a middle manager, because most managers, if they don't have a family experience, haven't had to manage it, right? And they haven't had that experience. And you were mentioning earlier that you've been working with some big organizations on that, because managers aren't necessarily trained to deal with neurodivergent employees or parents, right?
No.
And so it's important to have the discussions.
And I think research shows that organisations that have the best retention, that have the best performance, are those with psychological safety in the workplace. So somebody can come with an issue and know that there's not going to be a stigma attached to it. There's not going to be a penalty for coming and saying, I am a carer, I might need to work flexibly, or I do have additional needs that require some sort of adjustment in the workplace for me. And those workplaces that see that and say, thank you for sharing that with me, that's really important. Let's work together to make sure you can be your very best. They are benefiting from high levels of retention, high levels of productivity, and the same is the opposite is the same. So it really is on businesses to present a really safe environment for their employees.
Dan, I just wanted to jump in and find out from your work within businesses, what are some common barriers or roadblocks that you come across when trying to implement an inclusivity initiative? Do they look at you and be like, oh, not another one? Or how do you overcome some of these common barriers?
I think one of the big pitfalls that a lot of organisations fall into is that they rush to recruit. And that might sound quite strange for me to be kind of cautioning against, given my charity, but actually, if you do that, you often are reinforcing existing marginalisations which exist in our community. So organisations who have gone out and said, right, we're going to hire X% of talent into our software testing team, for example, what you'll find that does is that just reinforces the existing route in of those employees into the organisation, which will be disproportionately white, male, middle class, based in a relatively well-off part of England. So I say don't go out, rush and recruit. What you should do is you should be listening to that 20% of your workforce who are already neurodivergent. They will be the most effective source and the biggest agent for change that you've got. Often expensive consultancy is the first route that big organisations go down. And actually, there's so much intellectual capital that's been built up by that 20% of the workforce who are there. If you're going out to recruit, you can be sure they're there in the background saying, sorry, I've been here 15, 20 years, things aren't great, why are we bringing more people in this way? So I would caution against that. The second thing is, and I like the point that was made earlier, which is a lot of these changes and adjustments and accommodations, they're dead simple and they're dead cheap. And it's not the kind of the software and the noise cancelling headphones that people's minds tend to go to. The most important thing is the cultural thing and the psychological safety that you mentioned. The ability to interact on an individualized basis with your line manager is what the research that NIB have done over the last 2 years shows is the biggest impact. It's not I will not use this word again in public, reasonable adjustments. I don't believe that that's a good lexicon for us as a community. Who are you to tell me what's reasonable for me? I believe that we should be talking about readily available adjustments. So we see a big power imbalance between the employee and the employer, none more pronounced than when they're in the interview stage, for example. And particularly a lot of our youngsters who are coming out of employment, out of education into employment. So we want to make a world and a corporate world where actually readily available adjustments are things that people can go to and they can say, I need 8.5 on the NIB readily available adjustments guide, because we need to make sure that businesses actually know what they can be offering. Because I hear from my corporate members, it's not just that push from the employee, it's also a pull from them because they don't know what good looks like. So that's what I'm leading in NIB, a project at the moment, is to bring together that readily available adjustments guide.
Does anything chime with you there, Jack, from working
I think one of the sort of interesting, sort of picking up a lot of that is that cultural awareness. And if it comes from the HCM and a DE&I policies are extremely important. But when you're talking about the day-to-day, you need those frontline business managers or leaders, people who were seen and heard a lot by the organization and looked up to by the organization to stand up and talk about it. And so one of the things that we did was in all our panels, we got very senior management. In New York, we got our president of the entire firm to do one of the interviews. We've got very senior partners of the interviews to be the moderators on all the panels and just give a brief introduction to their experience of neurodiversity. And so it can't just be something coming sort of internally for an organization. I think you need the day-to-day business leaders to stand up and talk about it and embrace it as a conversation. was an important lesson for us.
And I think we need to get brave about our own biases as well. So whether that's as a teacher, an educator, or whether that's as an employer, it's sometimes taking a look inwards and thinking, we were talking earlier, if somebody says autism, they're autistic, people think Rain Man, people think they're always automatically drawn to one specific stereotype. And actually, you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. It's so varied, same with ADHD. And so I think it's really important that we've got that unique one-to-one personalised sort of relationship so that we can develop that.
I think it's also a lot to do with reducing some of the fear around this. I mean, I love that the conversations are happening, that people are talking about it. In the classroom, it feels a little bit different than it does in the workplace. I think, the heads of schools are talking about SEND in a different way. I'm quite interested to know what that pathway would be from school to work, and there just doesn't seem to be any support in place between the CEOs of these companies who have these incredible ideas, and it doesn't seem like they're talking to the heads of the schools, and that's something that I'd like to consider, having those conversations.
So Jack, I just want to come back to what you were mentioning about kind of creating a culture, of talking about this within companies. There may be people here today that, are in leadership positions or have their own companies. Do you have any tangible steps that they can take to get this conversation going? Anything that you've come across in your experience that, don't do that, or this worked really well?
The answer is not yet. The answer is I think we're all trying to learn as an organisation of the best ways to do it. And so actually one of the, at the end of one of the parents' evenings, we stood up and said, if you're part of an organisation, part of DEI, or you want to hear more, send us an email. And so we actually then had a round table with 18 leaders from Fidelity, Point72, some of the sort of big hedge funds and institutions in London, to literally just debate what was working and what wasn't working within their own organizations. And I think what came out of that is how nascent these conversations really are in terms of the organizational language around it. And so, at the moment, just keep experimenting is the answer. But, back to that original point, there are a lot of small things you can do and very easy to change, whether it's in an interview process or creating a parent group or being able to have a conversation with your boss about it, that really do change, that begin to change the narrative.
And I think that, mentioning about sort of the psychological safety again, coming back to that, I think it's really important that we are having those open conversations, and what works for one organisation might not necessarily work in the same way for another organisation. So the best way to find out what those employees need is to ask them directly. As Dan says, if you've got a 20%, sort of a percentage of your workforce, go to them, have an employee resource group, get my words out, where they can come together and speak honestly about what they need. Ask those people what they need, and be aware that policies need to be a bit of a working document. They need to be able to be a living, breathing representation of what you want for your workforce, and help them shape that and what that looks like. And actually, if we're empowering carers, if we're empowering neurodivergent employees, then we are going to benefit from better productivity, higher retention rates, because we're including them. Nobody wants life to happen to them. We want to be a part of the journey, and I think that's really important.
I think Dan's point, if it's 1 in 5 of your employees, I mean, that's a huge number of employees that you're touching, and whether it's the environment, whether it's being a parent, whether it's their own issues that they're having. And it really does affect the whole organization. And so it's really important to get those conversations going and starting.
I think it's also important to recognise that it's very personal as well, those strategies. And I appreciate, Charlie, that you mentioned that every separate workplace might have their own strategies, but I think, considering everybody as an individual, that certain strategies will work for others, will or won't work for others. I feel like also that we're at the stage that we don't know what strategies to choose from also, and myself being diagnosed with ADHD later in life, I now have coaching, and I'm trying to not blame myself for not having started coaching earlier. But coaching for me is absolutely incredible. Had I known that to be an option when I was younger, that would have, changed things a lot. But I think knowing what the options are, flexible working, I hadn't considered that. That's in my kind of toolbox of strategies I can approach my CEO or even, the head of the school about, to ask for those recommendations.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point. Just as in education, you have to personalize education for the student. You have to personalize it for the organization, or, Goldman Sachs is going to be very different than a car manufacturer, I'm assuming. So before I open it up to the audience for questions in a minute or so, I'd just like to just quickly ask each of you, just look into the future. What would be your ideal vision for moving forward for neurodiverse individuals within business? How do you see it looking in an ideal world?
I think for me, the raison d'etre for me setting up Neurodiversity in business was that we shouldn't be having the conversation about neurodiversity. It shouldn't be a topic that we talk about anymore. It's a beautifully simple concept, which is cognitive diversity. It's just differences in the way our brains are developed, different strengths, different ways that we communicate. So if the narrative within the business world can change away from kind of talking about neurodiversity, disability, drop-down box on your HR package, and think, right, how do I, as an employer, get the best out of you as an employee? That's the kind of the path of travel that we're seeing in the corporate world. It's going too slow for my liking.
Charlie?
Yeah, no, I would completely agree. I think if we can put people before profits, then the profits will come naturally. And I know that sounds very naive and maybe a little bit more sort of romantic, but I do think if we can invest in that individual and support them to be the best that they can be outside of the workplace as well as in, and we recognise that people aren't machines that just switch off at the door and don't bring their workplace, they don't bring their home life into the workplace. That used to be a very common conception that we could do that, and actually we can't. We're not robots. So I think if we can embrace people holistically and welcome and nurture people at where they are, meet them where they are, and then go on that journey with them and allow them to feel empowered.
From my point of view, it's a lot about inclusivity, but also I think we have an opportunity here to really learn from each other. I remember being a student learning and doing my GCSEs, creating my own GCSE revision techniques, talking to my friend and they were sharing their revision techniques, and creating that collaborative approach in terms of strategies. I think there's an opportunity to learn and understand what works for individuals, and kind of creating a toolbox for yourself.
Back to Dan's, the word deficit and disability and disorder, the Ds I don't like, and if we can change that language and help managers get the best out of their employees by understanding what's going on, that would be my goal. But my real goal, where it all came from, was really just back to your point, which was supporting the community around you. And the best advice and the best support I've had have been from other parents who've been going through it, and meeting them and just talking about it and sharing some of the frustrations and maybe some of the joys every now and again. But it's hard, right? And you need to continue to support other parents.
Brilliant. Well, I think we're just almost out of time there. So I just wanted to thank the panelists one more time. A really insightful discussion. A round of applause for the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I hope we have contributed some way to making a cultural shift and to start these conversations. So thank you very much again. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a nice day.